Olá, boa tarde a todos e a todas. Primeiramente, eu peço desculpas pelo nosso atraso para essa sessão. Nós tivemos um pequeno problema técnico, mas eu agradeço a todos que puderam aguardar e estar conosco essa tarde. Sejam muito bem-vindos à sessão para celebrar o Dia Internacional da Mulher. O Conselho Britânico organiza essa sessão para refletir um pouco sobre essa data, sobre esse mês. O 8 de março, e na verdade o mês de março, ele é um momento muito importante para refletirmos sobre o espaço da mulher na nossa sociedade, os avanços que tivemos e também quais são os desafios que nós enfrentamos e como que nós podemos pensar e refletir meios para garantir que futuras gerações tenham acesso a maiores oportunidades, que tenhamos um mundo mais igualitário no futuro e que possamos construir isso cooperando de vários modos. E um dos grandes desafios que temos observado no nosso trabalho é a inserção da mulher em carreiras ligadas às ciências, principalmente nas ciências exatas, mas também vemos grandes desafios na trajetória feminina para alcançar posições de liderança dentro da academia. Nós organizamos essa conversa hoje para entender as aspirações, desafios e possibilidades para mulheres em ciência, trazendo para isso duas convidadas especiais, a Diana Daste e a doutora Elizabeth Politzer. Eu agradeço muito por terem aceitado o nosso convite para dividir um pouco das suas experiências e visões sobre mulheres na ciência. Então, muito obrigada, Elizabeth, Jana. Essa conversa será realizada em inglês, mas contamos com um recurso de legendas para o português para os que precisarem. Então, mais uma vez, muito obrigada à nossa audiência. Thank you everyone for joining us today, the audience and our panelists. So I will start this session by introducing our panelists. Jana Dashi is political scientist by the Universidad Javeriana in Bogotá, and Masters in Management of Development and Applied Social Development by University College London. Currently, she is the Acting Regional Director of Higher Education at the British Council Americas. Her trajectory includes work with government, academia, and social organizations in Europe, Africa, and Latin America. Dr. Elizabeth Politzer trained originally in biophysics and obtained PhD in information science from the University of London. She spent more than 20 years as researcher and lecturer in the Department of Computing at the Imperial College. Elizabeth is director of Portia, a not-for-profit organization she co-founded in 2001. In 2011, she established the Gender Summit platform, and she is a member of the Elsevier Inclusion and Diversity Board, and member of Gender Insight in Steering Committee. I would ask now to Diana to introduce herself with the accessibility tools. After her, Elizabeth, if you could please introduce yourself, that would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Vera. Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening for some. I'm Diana Daste. I've already been introduced as regional lead for higher education in the Americas at the British Council. Physically, now our digital resources for accessibility, I am sitting in a white background. Actually, it's one of the team backgrounds with a window on my right-hand side. I am brunette, basically, and I'm wearing a striped white and blue shirt. Welcome, thank you.
Thank you, Jana. Elizabeth?
Yes, hello. I'm Elizabeth Politzer. I'm really excited to be part of this conversation and helping the British Council to advance women in science. I am in my home. It's 7:30 nearly in the evening, and I'm also wearing blue and white shirt. So we are well coordinated with Diana also. And what else can I say? I mean, yes, I'm in my sitting room, but you can't see it because I have blurred the background. And apparently that is the right way to do it. So I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Well, to describe myself, I'm Vera Oliveira, and I work for the British Council Brasil. I'm wearing a cream shirt with a black blazer, and I'm also using a Teams background that looks like an office environment. So we are well coordinated for this session. So once again, thank you so much, Elizabeth and Jana, for joining us today. And I think to kick off the session, we would like to hear a little bit about you personally and understand a little bit how you arrived where you are in terms of what inspired you. So we would like to hear a little bit about you, and when you look back at your academic and professional trajectories, what do you feel were the decisive factors or people who inspired you to have to arrive where you are right now? Diana, if you'd like to start, please, and then Elizabeth.
Thank you, Vera, and again, thank you for the opportunity of having this space. Thinking of people and decisive factors across career and professional trajectory, I think it's critical to understand role models and influences. You know, if I date back, I think it's critical to understand the role of the role the family plays in encouraging different pathways, in supporting different decisions. In my own particular case, I do have a strong role model from a woman, from my mother, advising from a position of strength and success, and I think that really shaped pretty much who I am in terms of evolving that path. Teachers have been decisive factors in encouraging that curiosity, in inspiring, in being inclusive and supportive, and also making the right questions for you to start having a critical position in the world. And coming into specifically my career as a political scientist, I would really highlight the role of researchers and how researchers are coming from these conditions of evidence-based and knowledge. And we're talking about, I have several references, colleagues, who I engage with, female colleagues. At the moment, I had the director of the faculty where I did my master's being a very strong role model in terms of a female role model leading an academic department, but also bringing different visions and bringing a richness around perspectives on the research itself, on the quality of knowledge produced, on the questions asked, on the factors considered. And as part of that academic ecosystem, I would really also value as a very positive decisive factor the support systems generated among those networks in the production of knowledge, in the sharing, in the publishing, and in reflecting on the different barriers and the key questions that were to be implemented in those conversations, not only in academic production, but also in publication and the whole sharing of that knowledge. And now coming more into an executive position in an organization that it's about capacity building and links and knowledge. I think the whole institutional vision, it's one of what I value also as a reference. You know, I'm only part of this institution because I believe in the values it shares. So I think it's important to have that alignment of where you're coming from and why you want to be in the place that you want to be.
Thank you, Diana, and really interesting to hear about all these powerful female figures in life and how they helped you and inspired you to be to arrive where you are and to have your career. So and it's also amazing to hear the role of advisors and teachers in this. And well, I would like to also hear from you, Elizabeth, how you feel, what factors or people you feel are essential for your academic professional life.
Okay, so in my life also my mother is basically the person that I think admire most, because no problem was too difficult for her, and she never complained, and she always felt that she was ready to meet every challenge. When I was 18, my family was forced to leave Poland. So I was brought up in a country that was communist, and therefore gender inequality just did not exist. I mean, we just never talked about it. I just believed as a woman I can do everything. And what I wanted to do is to study medicine. But then we had to leave Poland, and of course everything had to change. But I still wanted very much to study medicine. I made many attempts, well, 3 attempts to get into medical school, and I didn't succeed. So the next possibility then was to do medical research, and I managed to get into biophysics department at King's College London. That was headed by Maurice Wilkins, who won the Nobel Prize for DNA discovery. And whilst I loved every part of it, I liked the biochemistry and physics and everything else. Maurice Wilkins, because of his experience, his own experience of his career, that was part of the Manhattan Project and the atom bomb, he felt that he needs to do something for society, so he set up his biophysics department in order to do some sort of basically, he brought physics into biology, combined that, and that is the course that I took. But what really happened is that he also made it obligatory that everybody in the biophysics department has to do a course on a social responsibility of science. And it wasn't a course that there were lectures. We had to sit around in a room, a lot of people, and talk about it and discuss it and decide what it was about. And in the process, it involved thinking about a bit of philosophy, a bit of sociology. So it wasn't really very scientific. It was really, and then and because I questioned to myself all the time while I was doing biophysics as an undergraduate, how does all those courses connect together? What does it mean? Why is it that we have to do this bit of physics and this bit of chemistry and this bit of something else? How does it all connect? Why, how is this going to actually allow me to be a medical researcher? But when I attended this seminars, I think they were really seminars on social responsibility of science, I suddenly realized, that's really what was interesting for me. Is what is science for, and why one should be a scientist, and what can science do for society, the meaning of it. And therefore, that's what really then changed direction of my career. I decided that actually I am not made to be a laboratory scientist, that I need to be out there in the world. So I looked around for where are the opportunities, and of course that's the computing seemed like the way to go, because basically it provided the tools for that could for information and for influence and for knowledge storage and knowledge transfer. So I moved into doing computing, and I spent that a long time, but always at the side of the human side of computing. Yes? So the human-computer interaction and how people use computers, how they can be helped by computers, and how we can improve computers by understanding how people use them, etc. Yes, and in the process, then slowly, it seems like the whole career was a whole long series of somehow diverting from a straight path. But in the end, because I was in the Department of Computing, and one day a friend of mine who was in a floor above in a Department of Physics came and said that they are setting up a website for to bring together groups of scientists and other people who are interested in how to increase participation of women in science, and would I be interested in helping them create this website? And that was the beginning of Portia, which is my organization now. And that's how it led, because I was so strongly in belief that actually in equality, because that's where I came from. And then I started learning that actually how to recognize the inequality. And of course, once your eyes are open and you see it, you understand how to recognize it, you just can see it everywhere. But because we were at Imperial College, which is a university without social science departments, without psychology departments, it's all technology, and I was in a department of computing that was very much based on logical and formal methods. So I knew that the only way to make change is to gather evidence that would persuade scientists. So I target the scientists and try to open the eyes of the scientists to those inequalities for women in science and other groups in science. So that's how it all started. And that's where I am now.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And it's really interesting to hear about how you developed yourself as a professional, and it's really fascinating to hear from a perspective of not having or a supposed equality that happened or people believed was happening, to identifying the inequalities and being able to challenge ideas or preconceived ideas people have about what academia should look like or what we should be doing. And I think that when you mention about understanding what's the meaning of science, we come to something that's more current than ever about what's the impact of science in society. And coming to that, I think there is another question of who is making science, who is behind the scenes making it happen. So really interesting to hear about this. And I'm coming up to that, I also bring you another question. I mean, this week we had the 8th of March and all the celebrations, but we understand there are still many challenges for women. And I would like to understand from both of you, maybe Elizabeth, if you could kick off the session, and after that, Diana, what do you feel are the biggest challenge for women in the scientific career? I mean, from your perspective, in not only in the UK, but from the experience you had working with other countries, seeing the international outlook for women in science, what do you feel are not only the biggest challenge, but how much of these challenges do you feel were reflecting in your career choices, or are challenges that you inform other women that are in the scientific career so that they can make informed decisions?
Well, I think from my own personal perspective, I mean, it is this thing called work-life balance, and it is this thing about family responsibilities, and it is the motherhood. It does take, does require you to do things that you really want to do, but it also does take a lot of time. And so as especially young researchers don't really have as much time to women researchers, as much time as men, because they do other things. And so if you want to write research papers, so that's you are judged on how many research papers you have produced, that's how your excellence, then it is, and it's really through evidence, it is quite clear now that it takes time to write research papers. And if you have small children, yes, and you have to look after them, then I think that this takes time away. And I think women feel overstretched, yes, because they have to do all those things, but they don't want to give up. And then some evidence shows that among senior researchers, women researchers, the ones who are really successful, they are frequently the ones who don't have family. I mean, they have husbands or partners, but they don't have children. And that is a very cruel thing to do, to say to a woman, there is a choice, you're either going to be excellent scientist or you can be mother and a scientist. Obviously, some women manage to do it, but I think for many women it is really difficult. And certainly in my life, I had to make choices and compromises. But my situation was helped by the fact that Imperial College had a creche for children, which was subsidized by the university. Yes, so my children, when they were little, when they were about 6 months, they could go there. Of course, it was still quite expensive, but I had a husband who worked, so that was helped. And so my children were stayed there, so it meant I could actually do full day of work. I could be there at whatever it was, 8:30 and leave at 5 o'clock. And then when they were at the school age, there was a French lycée just down the road, and I managed to get them into the French lycée. It meant that they had to have their education in French and not in English, but at least again, in the French system, they had this support for parents that you could actually leave children until 5 o'clock, and they were basically had activities with the teachers. So it meant that, unlike in many situations, is that the woman has to always think about, I have to drop my children to school, I have to pick them up from school. It's all interruptions into how the way scientists work. You can't attend all the seminars. You have to, again, it's the matter of time. So it's, those problems are just natural, and I don't know what the woman should not be punished for having children, but in terms of their career progression, and they can be solved. I mean, it can be solved by providing a childcare, affordable childcare. I mean, my sister in Australia, I mean, she had my parents there and my elder sisters, so she could develop a career as a businesswoman. She set up a very successful design studio, but she always could call on my parents and my elder sister to help out with her children. But again, you know, that's disappearing. I mean, in places like Poland, where women could rely on the mother or the grandparents to look after the children, now they can't, because like everybody has to work, because simply you just cannot afford not to work. And so I think there's kind of a structures that women could in the past depend on, they are disappearing, and the only way to help them is to provide the affordable childcare and affordable caring if they have to care for their elderly parents. Yes, it's just there must be a reason why so many women feel that they kind of have to make the choice, either stay in science or leave science. I think that's a really sad and great loss of talent.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And it's a terrible choice for women, and it's a terrible loss for science to lose all this brain power. And I think you bring a very important point about the support network, both family, but in a context of societal changes, that women should or could have this institutional support. Jana, if you could also share from your view, please.
Yes, well, I completely agree and endorse what Elizabeth is saying. If I could just add the practicalities of that, you know, motherhood and maternity moment and the time dedicated as a scientist. But if I could also add the whole context and social expectation and gender norms that are associated not only with having or not having to choose, but with biases of institutions choosing or not to engage one professional, even if it's young or without kids, because it's maybe in productive age, because it would be more expensive potentially to accommodate that professional in their structures, considering that there are now increasingly a bit more of a norms and support systems. Attached to the social norms and the gender norms associated with women in specific careers, and particularly science, I would also highlight the pressure on the kind of subjects and the kind of spaces where women can speak up, the kind of subjects that they can bring into the table, and even the tone of the voice and the loudness where they can start engaging in certain conversations. So of course we are talking about a long trail of assumptions and a long trail of stereotypes and associated norms that eventually lead to a constraint, sometimes symbolic but sometimes practical, on the spaces where women can evolve and can progress. And that it's partly what it's leaving behind, the engagement of girls in STEM. You know, we are talking that, you know, overall in a bulk figure, less than 30% of women are engaged in STEM careers currently, and that's dating back precisely to those challenges, to those stereotypes where you associate more girls and women with care responsibilities, and you associate boys and men with experimentation and more hands-on production. It dates back, of course, when we're talking of early career researchers and young professionals at the start of their career, the whole sexism and harassment that has also been, you know, claimed and experienced by several as a currency to progress. So there's still all these practical elements that are, I think, starting to be a bit more outspoken, but have been quite hidden, and now are starting to appear. And I'd say in the moments of high-level negotiation, you know, in male-dominated environments, there tends to be a pressure, sometimes practical pressures of speaking you down, interrupting, you know, trying to rephrase what you had already said because maybe it was not what you intended to say. You know, it's not a cliche, but this whole notion of mansplaining, it does have an impact when you're talking about high-level negotiation. So I think those are challenges very, very, very felt in the skin. But if I were to bring them in more of a wider context, I'd probably also add the invisibility of the success. And you did mention, Vera, in your moderation, who's doing the science behind the scenes and what kind of recognition it's being granted for that actual doing, and who's getting the credit versus who's doing it. I think we still have lots of that. And that, of course, reflects in elements and credits for career progression as a whole. And on the other side, the invisibility of the role models and multiple responsibilities carried out by women outside their professional spaces, and how not recognizing this, it's limiting the ability of, or the possibility of institutions to adapt and to be reactive. I do think there is a progressive movement of institutions and society, I do believe, wanting to adapt and wanting to support and generate those spaces. But first we need to outline them, make them clear so that institutions can support and can accommodate. And that results, of course, in us, as you also rightly, both of you pointed out, losing the richness of diversity in professional development, if we're talking of an individual level, but in influencing decision-making processes that are not only more inclusive, but tend to be also more creative, tend to open towards wider spaces and spectrums of society. So I think the challenges are multi-level. They are social, they are symbolic, they're practical, but they're also institutional and political. Of course, there are power relations involved, and that's the political journey that we need to embark and embrace. But I also think by addressing those challenges, there is the opportunity to outline the different steps in which institutions that are supportive of this agenda and who believe in a different model of society, because it is a model of society, can practically engage in contributing to this outcome.
Thank you, Jana. And I think you bring a very interesting point about when you talk about the invisibility and the actions that we could make to try and bring these models back and try and address this, bring to light the issues around that. And I think it would be interesting to hear about, taking from what you said, hear a little bit about what the Women's Science program is doing that addresses some of those issues that you and Elizabeth brought, and especially when you talk about the recognition side and who is making science. If you could talk briefly about that, please.
Sure. Yeah, the Women in Science program, it's basically structured using a life cycle approach, a systemic life cycle approach, and through this we are understanding and trying to intervene and support the different challenges and opportunities of girls and women in their engagement and progression of STEM careers. So we do this by identifying key areas of intervention, key actions, and by strengthening the links between the UK and the Americas at the individual and the institutional levels. So we're talking about high-level partnerships, but we're also talking about niche networks, believing in the power of networks. The program is structured in three key pillars. So we're talking about inspiration and interest. How is it that we can share, develop, contribute, make more visible role models that are fundamental to inspire new generations and also existing professionals in STEM careers and in STEM progression as a whole. The second pillar, it's around performance and what abilities and what kind of strategies are targeted for specific audiences of women in all their diversity, of course, and to strengthen. So if we're talking about maternity, are we talking about some kind of network? Are we talking about mentoring schemes? Are we talking about science communication? And I'm referring to capacity building initiatives that we've already implemented throughout the program, because then it's a science communicated by women to all, you know, and this might be a strategic entry point to start shifting the paradigm of who does and who communicates and how science is communicated. And then we advance in a pillar of recognition and influence. So understanding this journey, understanding the challenges that some of us have already mentioned, and understanding there is a leaky pipeline, there is a loss of talent because those issues are not addressed, and there are key realities that, you know, result in the loss of talent, result in frustration, and also results in reduced capacities of a specific population to actually address not only individual or STEM challenges, but global challenges. Coming up in that ladder, what are we talking about? What can be done in terms of influence and recognition? You know, in Latin America and the Caribbean, less than 4% of women occupy some kind of high-level senior position, being it in the public or private sector related to science, to the STEM sector. What's lacking to overcome that leaky pipeline, and what is the kind of influence that we can aspire and that we want to achieve by linking these different individuals, by linking the different institutions, by aiming the transformation of institutional and political and policies. And how is it that we can also encourage that they are absorbed, designed, absorbed by not only by the different members, but by the society as a whole. There is also a notion of best practice and shared practice, where it's important to learn and to understand what's been done, what has worked, what hasn't worked. And there's also a key element of documenting processes. So when you raise the visibility angle, it's about that. It's about also not only raising voices, which we of course believe it's very important, but it's also about documenting the process and the evolution of that landscape. And that's important that it's followed up, and that we provide the different tools to observe it and to monitoring it, to celebrate it when it's the case. But also to understand the way and the roadmap that there is still to pursue. I think that's it in a nutshell. I'll pass it over, and of course, just to strengthen the role of partnerships and the role of networks. And Elizabeth is a key partner, and I'm not going to spoil it with our key initiatives because I'm hoping that she will present it. But it's the kind of identifying, you know, key institutions, key individuals working in this agenda, identifying spaces in which we can jointly grow, where we can connect strategically, and where we can optimize the networks and the relationships around the gender, leadership, science, and diversity agendas.
Yeah. Thank you, Jana. And I think you bring a very good, almost spoiler with Elizabeth. And this actually leads me to my next question to Elizabeth, because we've been talking so much in so many different forums about who is doing science and how we recognize talent. And there's another question that's really important for us to have, because oftentimes we talk about we should have more equality in terms of representation in science, but there's the other side of how is science impacted by not having this. So I think this is where I think, Elizabeth, it would be really nice to hear from you on from your work and the work that you, especially with the Gender Summit and Portia. What's the importance of having a more diverse science, especially when you think about not only women, but the intersectionalities of race, income, education? So or so I should ask, what's the impact that not having a diverse science is having, or what examples we have of the importance of having a more diverse science, and how you've been working around that and supporting a change in this agenda?
Right. Well, it's very important question, because one has to demonstrate the benefits of having diversity. But as we don't really have anywhere in the world a system that is truly diverse, a science system is truly diverse or gender equal, we can only say now is what are the problems with the science as it is now. It has been really very much a Western white male science. Okay, so the scientists were basically white men, and the subjects were also men, and mainly white men. And so one can say that the results, is the science really excellent as it's been claimed, or is maybe not so excellent because the results don't really apply, or not as good for other groups in society. Okay, so and that's there's a plenty of evidence. Okay, because even when the drugs are tested on male animals, rats or mice, then produce results that then when they're translated into prescription drugs, turned up to be, those prescription drugs turned up to be much more dangerous to women than to men. And of course that costs money. It might cost near $1 billion to produce a new prescription drug. And if they have to be withdrawn from the market, that's a waste for society, and also disregard for women's safety. And the same thing can be told about cars being less safe for women. And as much as you look around, you can find lots of examples. So we can basically have evidence to challenge scientists and science to say that the assumptions that current knowledge is excellent does not hold. That we have many evidence to show that actually it is so frequently worse for women, and definitely disregards the needs of the different racial groups or ethnicity, or makes assumptions about why people's behavior or outcomes are like this. For example, we don't really understand the toxicity of environmental toxicity for women, and you might be working in some factory and being exposed to chemicals while being in very early stages of pregnancy, and yet that will affect their mental performance of the baby. But just then might be assigned to the fact that she might be just a poor woman, and it's a bit assigned to poverty reasons, and not to the fact that she was exposed to the chemicals while she was working. So, therefore, we can demonstrate that current science knowledge has got lots of gaps. There are lots of gaps in knowledge that affect how reliable the evidence is for other groups in society. The science has been, questions are prioritized because there's never enough funding for everything. So whoever sits on the committees will decide where the funding should go, and that those committees are dominated by particular groups, say men, then of course the questions maybe to address the needs of other groups in society will not be asked. And COVID is demonstrating this in a really, really strong way, because the original approach to how to deal with COVID was to rely on epidemiological models and not look at the economic and societal impacts. We didn't take into account the ethnicity, how that affects we've just been learning all this right now. And I think that kind of proves that when science is being done, having different diverse points of views, different perspectives on a problem, it kind of puts it in context, what the problem is about, what this epidemic or pandemic really means. It means that nobody actually directs the thinking, yes, because if you have more ideas at the table, yes, you can actually look out at understand the context of the problem. And if you, and it's been now demonstrated through evidence that if you have a woman and man in a team, the collective intelligence of the team goes up. And the reason is not because women's brains are different, It is simply that women are much more sensitive to context and to see that the other people around the table want to say something. So it's not like a one leader decides what the agenda should be. You have to open up the agenda and be brave to listen to other people's points of views. And must be said that for me it was a learning process because, of course, being brought up in a communist country, I was always feeling that there was always someone who knew what should be done and just pass this information to everybody who could then do it. But as part of our work, we became more and more involved in doing participatory workshops and participatory events, which means that you really just open up the whatever topic for a discussion, and then you find that you actually learn so much because in your head there are so many assumptions. We have all our own norms and stereotypes, and I think they will affect, doesn't matter how objective you want to be. It is quite now has been shown that scientists are also not really objectives and not really, they also have stereotypes in their heads, and those stereotypes make them prefer to employ men and not women. So diversity can be, and I think should be, part of the system. I think should be accepted as a part of the excellence to challenge how problems are being defined and solved. It's certainly if you have a diverse team, then the cognitive understanding of the problem changes because nobody says this is the right way to do it. Yes, you have to agree how to do it. At the same time, there has to be space for disagreement. We have done a gender summit in Japan where everything is very hierarchical and everybody has to agree. Eventually, if everybody has to agree on something, then it dilutes the possibility of innovation. Okay, so I think what the diversity helps is can be difficult to manage, but it improves opportunities for innovation, not just technological innovation, but also social innovation. Yes, we have to innovate how we deal with situation. And again, COVID here is a very important example of how to improve this, why social innovation is so important and shouldn't just always just concentrate on technology and on products. Yes, that how the society functions and how the different parts of society can communicate together and work together, how we can involve citizens in a science production. This is all part of the diversity. So I think there are methodologies are being developed now, how to make science more diverse, and through, for instance, involving scientists in observatories of the environment, changes in the environment, and I think that so basically, it's the evidence being gathered at the different ways from the bottom up and led to the kind of a formal scientific approaches, and that improves the way science is done, and then that evidence goes down into the practitioner level. And again, so I think this is the new way, and I think that's the only way that science can become relevant to society and provide the solutions that society really needs. So not just some assumptions driven somewhere from the top, from small groups of people who are at the top leadership and they decide. I think we really need to be very open and listen to other voices and really try to understand what science can do for society. We cannot decide it from inside of the laboratories. There has to be a process that involves the citizens as well.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I think it's a really, you brought really important points. I think one is the unconscious bias that we all have, and I think there is sometimes the myth. I think this is being debunked, but I think that it used to be that there was a myth of neutrality in science, that science was neutral, and I think what we understand is that it's not neutral. Everyone carries their own ideas, their own biases, and I think you bring another important point that there's almost sometimes an elitist feel for science, that it is the very top of people and those people would know better. And the idea that actually it needs to be a diverse set of people that can actually be connected to society, and the idea of citizen science is really important as well. So I think it's really interesting to understand how this diversity, and we are seeing studies that talk about the importance of diversity, for instance, in companies to drive profit and everything else. So to understand also how science can be benefited from diversity. And I think one point that I think it's really interesting for us to explore, I understand that we are coming to the close of today's session, but I think it would be really important to hear from both of you on the power of networks and the things that can be carried by putting people together. So I think, Diana, if you could talk a little bit about the networks in terms of not only Brazil and UK, but also the networks between Latin American countries, how we can come together, and some of the initiatives being thought around that. I think it would be really interesting for us. And Elizabeth, if after that you could also talk a little bit about some of the propositions for this year's Gender Summit in Latin America.
Okay, I'll try to be brief, as I understand we're coming to a close, but I think, well, reflecting on the power of networks, I think just to restate that it's in the ethos of the program, it's understanding those connections at the individual level, but those connections at the institutional level, and how we can generate through that those meaningful links, but meaningful links that in our case, in the case of the program, they're sustained by capacities. So it's through the building of capacities that we start identifying those niche networks that are going to grow and to expand. And in the other realm, perhaps at the individual / institutional level, there is a concrete initiative that we're pushing forward across the different countries, and that's the UK Women in Science Américas Association. That's a very concrete initiative. It's a space through which we are bringing and connecting different representatives from different highly relevant institutions, given the profile of the institution or the influence of the institution or the relevance that it has to the science and technology ecosystem, in mapping, in creating this roadmap to change. So it's understanding what's been done in the different countries in the Americas, what's been done in the UK, and what are the kind of practices that we can implement, what's the kind of methodologies that have worked, what's the kind of actions that have been implemented in specific institutions that have, have been tested and tried, and they actually work. They've resulted in more inclusive environments. They've resulted in enabling spaces for women to participate and to develop. Some are networks themselves. We are also exploring mentoring schemes and how that is practically implemented. What's the role of a mentor? How can mentorship grow into an actual support system? And how can those mentors, apart from being a role model, can become part of that support system that it's going to actually practically contribute with knowledge and with specific advice on career progression. So the UK Americas Association, we're working mainly with Brazil, Mexico, Peru, Colombia, and the UK, of course, in understanding and mapping these initiatives and gathering. We already had we've had several, but we had a kickoff meeting of mapping. The challenges and the possibilities to design this roadmap are huge. So mapping and prioritizing, the key elements to optimize these relationships. That's also a challenge with networks. So when we're talking about generating and growing networks, it's very promising. We believe in it, and then that's what we do. But also capturing the impact and the reach and the spillovers of those networks is very hard. And the harder it gets, the more promising, because it means that lots of things are actually developing from those connections. But it's also important for us from a program perspective to understand what can actually be reached, and maybe to generate some mechanisms where we can follow up the impact and the spillovers and the consequences of those networks. And that's something that we will also be observing and trying to define under the agenda of the association. So I'll leave it there. I'm just stressing that there have been some networks that have been generated as part of our capacity building offer. And it's exciting to see how we connect these women, how they feel identified through the to the delivery of the content, which is not only content, you know, if we're talking about a science communication workshop, it was not only about science communication, and that's what they said in their feedback, in their testimonials. It's not only about entrepreneurship, science entrepreneurship, it's about sharing a vision. It's about understanding the role, the position where we are speaking from and feeling that others have been also in that position. So how do we share that path, and how can we openly relate to those challenges and to those wins as well? So it has been encouraging to see how those networks have consolidated from zero, or how some of them have actually grown when they were existing, because of that notion of identification plus capacity plus opportunity, and plus the common vision of other world and our role in actively designing and leading that world.
Thank you, Diana, and really inspiring hearing about the networks and the power of mentorship and of shared experiences. I think we hear so much about, even beyond the contents, about the feeling of belonging that they feel, and it's always fantastic. Elizabeth, if you could talk also very briefly about the Gender Summit for Latin America and Caribbean and the expectations around that.
Right, so I'm very delighted that there is going to be Gender Summit Latin America. This is going to be number 3, but we're going to have a 21st Gender Summit in April. That's since 2011. So it just shows how important the platform is and valuable. What I feel about Latin America and the Caribbean is that it's behind the other regions in the world in terms of taking on this thing about the importance of gender equality and diversity in science, that it is really beneficial for the science and the relevance of science to society. And now that I'm listening to Diana, I feel that what has happened in Europe, definitely, and also in the UK, that the progress was driven by networks and groups of women. So the women would get together, their eyes are already open to the inequalities, yes? And they are scientists, or they are in a world of science. So they really understand the two issues, and they are always together, working together. They can be really, really powerful. And I think that's incredibly timely to have this initiative from the British Council, because not only that it can be then inform the Gender Summit content for the Latin America, which is really, it's very critical that it's actually the content, the program, the speakers and everything else is well based within the Latin American region. Because clearly, I have absolutely no idea about what is important, so we have to rely on the regional. But also, it means there's an opportunity for ownership of this Gender Summit platform in the future to be then somehow shared across all the countries in Latin America, and I think that would be the ideal situation. And so one needs some drivers to achieve this. So there is not just a conference, but something that comes out from the conference with strategy, with maybe some roadmap for action, and someone then has to take this on and implement it. And then women's groups, women's networks are usually the one channel and mechanism that seems to be always willing to take on yet another job. Yes. Well, it's much harder to go to institutions because they have a set hierarchies and whatever. So it's much easier actually to make progress through this less formal channels and mechanisms. And of course, there are now women's networks all over the world, and they can be incredibly influential. In Asia, they're very influential in Asia. They obviously were very influential in the UK and in Europe. So one can learn from the experience of those groups in other countries and what works, what doesn't work. Because one thing, there are ways now to, how you challenge authority. Yes, it's something that one can learn from people who have gone through this experience. Yes, so I am all for the power of networks, but also when networks can turn into communities of practice. Yes, because there are certain things like mentoring. You create a communities of practice for mentoring, so people can understand, how to be a good mentor. But there might be also others for like communities of practice that support young researchers, young women researchers. So networks are more fluid. Communities of practice have a particular purpose. Yes, so one can then advance from broader networks into some more specific communities of practice. And I think, so I'm really looking forward to the Gender Summit in June. I'm in Latin America, and to learning. I know we're going to be have an interest all over the world, because people in other regions of the globe will want to also to attend. And I think the sharing the experience, when we have a gender summit in Africa, there seems to be so much energy among the participants. They really feel like, they really want to do something. And I would like the same to come out in gender summit in Brazil, is some kind of create this feeling that, now is the time for change. This is a good timing. The world is ready. We have learned now, how to not to do it and how to do it. And of course, taking COVID experience as the background, yes, it's absolutely necessary, yes, now for science to bring more women in, yes, and for us, like Diana keeps on saying, to connect all those players in the science system with society and kind of see a common purpose, yes, which means science that actually does something really good for society.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And well, it's been a fantastic session. Thank you both for being here. I'm afraid we won't have time for questions by the audience, but I think it was really good to hear from both of you. And I would like to thank also the people who are here with us for allocating their time. We understand that during these times there are several events, so thank you for joining us for today. And well, I'd like to ask you to say your farewell. And one final thing I would ask you to include is, if you were to leave our audience, the women, with one advice, what would it be? So, Jana, your advice.
One advice, it's a hard one. The first thing I'm going to say is that it's been a real pleasure to take part of this conversation. Thanks a lot for putting the program together, and for my wonderful speaker colleague. It's been very interesting to hear you both in this amazing conversation. The other thing I'd like to say just before I lose the mic and the event is over, a bit of a pitch. We do have a scholarship program open at the moment for women in STEM. It's live. It's for Southeast Asia, South Asia, and the Americas. So please get your candidacies there through the link of the British Council, Mulheres na Ciência, Mulheres no STEM. You will find the different institutions that are adscribed to the scheme. We're talking about 8 universities. We're talking about 48 scholarships that we would be distributing across the Americas. So it's all about the audience. It's about you. It's about getting you and offering the opportunity. A specific element of this master's is providing support for mothers. So that's being recognized. We want to target, we want to reach underrepresented groups in science, and recognizing that mothers have a harder time to travel with their children, and that's part of the conditions that we are recognizing. So please read the terms of reference. I'll if I can ask the moderator to put the link and get our applications going on the website. That would be great. So just before I forget. In terms of advice, I think the piece of advice I would share out there, it's around believing that the role of women, the role of gender in science, it's just to contribute to a huge richness in terms of production, in terms of discussion, in terms of quality, in terms of effectiveness, and having that power of bringing all this wealth. It's also a strong source of strength to continue getting our message out there, to continue pursuing those dreams related to STEM careers. I do think a single advice for a systemic problem, it's around that. It's around understanding the wealth, the richness, the power behind it as a source of energy and as a source of inspiration for all of us in our careers. And then the other complement, in terms of that same piece of advice, and in terms of that richness that I see behind the diversity in science that we all see, we all share, is STEM disciplines, STEM careers are part of your universe. If you see it as such, go for it, engage, start, pursue it. And there will be the systems and there will be the support to develop and to progress in those careers. And I think increasingly institutions and the whole system is adapting to recognize that. And they might need a bit of a nudge sometimes, but in other institutions, we're here to do so. So believe and engage, because there is an immense power of transformation behind diversity, gender, and science.
Thank you, Diana. Over to you, Elizabeth.
Okay, so for me is, if you are in science already, don't give up, don't leave, okay? You might change the direction, and believe me, my direction changed so many times, but it seemed that each step, it seemed like I'm losing something, but actually, as they said, one door closes, another opens, and it's true in science. You can move, because you can move between disciplines, you can move between sectors. What science knowledge gives you is confidence. So when you know, because you understand, the world much better than most people, you can distinguish between when someone is giving you evidence that you can rely on and evidence that you can't, like during the COVID. Yes? So you can actually makes you a much stronger person, because you're not reliant on gossip or false news. The other one is that, of course, it's really incredibly interesting now, science. Yes, it's because it's reaching out, and with the internet and with now the trend, we're moving all towards the knowledge society or knowledge-based society. It's the knowledge that is the power, is to be able to actually know how to find information, how to apply it. And there are so many different opportunities now with the big data science, with digitalization of knowledge. So there are so many different opportunities that it just makes doing science, it seems to me now in this current times, as opposed to when I started, it seems much more interesting and worthwhile, with many more opportunities. You don't have to think, you have to actually ask yourself, what is your stereotype of a scientist? Because I bet it is the wrong one, okay? I think we still think about scientists as they were like 40 years ago. I don't think that really matters. A scientist now could have a science background, can give you a portfolio careers. You can be a researcher, but you can also be a blogger, you can also be in outreach activities and so on. So, and if some of your friends are thinking about, or young people thinking of, what career, I would say just go for science. This is really the safest way of ensuring that you have a future in the economy. Okay, so I think I would strongly recommend this. I didn't persuade my children, but I think, because anyway they're a bit old now, but I think if they were young now, I would force them to do science.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And I think this is an amazing advice, and both advices were fantastic. And the final advice from my end is, for all the women who are here, please look at the link for the master scholarships and apply. But thank you so much, Elizabeth, Jana. This has been a fantastic session. Thank you both for joining us. And we will be sharing this session on YouTube, Facebook, and I hope everyone can enjoy it, comment it. And well, thank you so much. And we look forward to Gender Summit Latin America in June 2021. So thank you all, and have a nice rest of the day.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.